So we got two superhero movies over the summer trying to do pretty much the same thing. Introduce a new world completely separate from the Marvel and DC cinematic universes that came before them, in an attempt to win back fans who noped the hell out after a series of disappointing flops, while also trying to bring in new fans whose naive spirits haven't yet been crippled by all this low-effort garbage we've been seeing out of both studios. And both movies went about it pretty much exactly the same way, by skipping the origins of these new characters and dropping us right in the middle of their stories in a world with its own history, lore, and established relationships, with our main characters on each world having already gone through some of the major growth we usually associate with an origin story. And with both movies holding the future success of multiple already in production multi-million-dollar projects, a lot of money was already on the line depending on whether they succeeded at their goals or bombed horribly, as has been happening so often recently. And though neither of them are going to be joining the Billion Buckaroo Club, one of them is doing moderately well and seems pretty likely to at least make its budget back, while the other's had a second weekend drop-off that calls its ability to make it past technical bomb territory into question. Now, plenty of people will tell you that it's because Fantastic Four is attached to the MCU, which many people see as radioactive leprosy when it comes to quality ever since Endgame. But I think that's an unfair assessment, since, let's be honest, Superman had a lot working against it too. Superman's already a character the general public thinks of as boring, because they're stupid. And though the movies he was in were divisive, a lot of people really liked Cavill in the role, with many being disappointed that he was being replaced with a guy who looks a lot like him, but smaller. And most importantly, the last few DC movies have bombed so absolutely, hilariously badly that they had no choice but to scrap the entire universe, tossing the baby out with the bathwater straight and deservedly into a friggin' blender. And though nerds like us know that this is a whole new DC universe, the majority of people barely know the difference between your MCUs, your DCUs, your DCEUs, and any other U Hollywood wants to toss at us. I say it's another reason that Fantastic Four is not resonating as well with audiences. A reason why word of mouth ain't helping it limp along in the same way that it has for Superman. And that's the shockingly small amount of world building on Fantastic Four's Earth 828 compared to this new, much more fleshed out Earth we're seeing out of Superman. Since being entirely new worlds for you to meet and fall in love with the same way that you did with previous ones using these characters was pretty much what they were going for, let's take a look at how one achieves it while the other absolutely does not. Fantastic Four's superficial retro-60s futurism versus Superman's internal legitimate retro-Silver Age idealism. Boy, that's a mouthful, but I promise I ain't gonna get too pretentious. I don't want to lose Joe Common Man drooling onto the screen while he watches, so that's a mouthful. That's what she said. Did that do it? Is he still here? Alright, good. He fell asleep. The video will autoplay, so we're all good. Let's move on. You may look at both movies and think, but Superman looks like a normal city. Fantastic Four's got all them retro 60s building. Ain't that world building? It looks all different to me, bub. But no. That's not world building any more than putting on a top hat while you're butt-ass naked at your grandma's funeral is formal attire to the rest of your family. It's all just superficial. It doesn't actually affect the world or story all that much. You could toss off the entire retro 60s vibe of this movie, and what would change in the plot or characters? Really, not much. Compare that to a similar themed world like Fallout. You remove the retro vibe and the entire culture of pre-war America would completely change, as well as the effects it has on the new wasteland culture developing after the war. Fallout is specifically a retro vision of a utopian future turned into an apocalyptic dystopian nightmare due to the never-changing human drive towards war. Fantastic Four is nothing that complex in its reasons for its retro style. If you remove it from Fantastic Four, what actually changes? The cars, building, and clothes look different, sure, but the culture is basically just our culture anyways. And the way that people talk and think is like how people talk and think already over in the MCU. The level of technology ain't actually very different from our own. No one is ever limited by the technology of this different back-in-time style world. And the technology we do see is not anything that would have been impossible within the modern MCU anyways. When the FF first went into space in their origin story, I thought that the technology would be somewhat limited to the tech available at the time the comics were written, just with Reed's many inventions advancing the world a bit. And I thought that would be an interesting limitation in facing Galactus. But then later, they show that Reed's just developed faster than light travel, so no, that is not a factor in this movie. There's none of the racial or gender roles of the time. Sue just hops up into space while completely pregnant and no one really bats an eye. This is all fine and good. I don't need to watch the Fantastic Four version of Mad Men that does a deep exploration on the cultural psyche of the time. I have no problem with superficial visuals. However, the question becomes, besides the obvious answer of the original comics were published in the 60s, why does this world look like this? As opposed to a million other choices you could make. What would be different if it was just based in some kind of futuristic retro noir future like Blade Runner? Or the poser wannabe 80s retro world of Ready Player One? or just taps it into the high-tech anime-inspired world we see over in Spider-Verse with Spider. Hell, look at another retro-futuristic world based on a similar time period with BioShock's Rapture. But while BioShock was exploring unregulated Randian idealism against the collectivist grifter populism that it was critiquing in a time period inspired by the time the book that it's taking inspiration was written from, Fantastic Four is exploring family. A theme that can work in literally any time period or any backdrop. So yes, the movie is based in a similar time period to the one those original comics were written in, but completely minus the philosophies, culture, and worldview of that time. Hell, even the goddamn Jetsons was critiquing modern life through the lens of futuristic idealism, showing that though technology may advance, humanity will remain the same. Meanwhile, Superman had an actual goal in its world building, besides just wanting to look different than the previous universe. Its goal was to bring a Silver Age comic to life in the modern day, both in the look of the world and the themes the movie was exploring. The world is explicitly built from the ground up to be a recognizable, cynical, jaded, modern world, with all the imagery and trappings we've all become all too familiar with. The 24-hour news talking heads selling some agenda, the leaked out footage of some private conversation to turn the public against a person or idea, armies of internet bots laying the groundwork to push people towards specific narratives, corporations fanning the fears of the public and government to gain more power to push their own agendas, messy foreign wars with people on both sides screaming about who is right and who is wrong, with most people unable to tell what is true and what is false, while people die and there's nothing you can do about it, since you can barely formulate your own opinion in the midst of all of this deliberate chaos. And boom, in comes the Silver Age comic superhero to say, you know what? Screw that, man. Things are simple. Killing people is bad. Helping people is good. With that Silver Age idealism saying, damn the consequences of doing what's right, and who gives a crap what anyone says about it? Because Superman and the other heroes are powerful enough and free enough to just impose their righteous will on the world in the kind of way that only seems possible in a fictional comic book. And it leads you to maybe think, does the world need to be so complex? Am I being manipulated into my confusion and apathy about the world? Through that lens, the bright, colorful Silver Age gleam of Metropolis, layered over the corrupt, unhappy trappings of the modern world underneath it all, isn't just randomly chosen because it's what the world looks like if we toss some Silver Age crap on it, and that Silver Age aesthetic of Superman ain't just because that's a cool-looking time period and we wanted to grab the vibe to give our movie some cred that it's an actual superhero movie. It's specifically chosen and fleshed out to tell this story. If this had just been a retro 40s style world or a Bronze Age Superman, you could not tell this story. It'd come off completely differently. So Superman may not look like it has the same level of world building because the cars look pretty normal, but every choice in this movie is as deliberate, and much more so than the random futuristic look of Fantastic Four. Both worlds do have interesting, unique looks, though, that feel very different from what we've seen out of superhero movies before. But one is purposeful, filled with themes and ideas that make the look and feel of this world interesting, purposeful, and alive, while the other does look cool, but doesn't actually matter to the plot, characters, or really any aspect of the movie, being about as deep as trying to swim in a puddle. But does any of that actually matter? A little bit, but there's another aspect of the world building that I think people subconsciously feel the difference of even more between the two movies. Superman's living, breathing side characters versus Fantastic Four's background cardboard cutouts. The actual look and feel of the world is one thing, but the people who live on it is just as important, and actually quite more so. There's plenty to say about how each movie handles building out the main characters, but I ain't gonna go too much into that, since that's more of a writing philosophy nitpicking kind of thing than being about world building. Instead, I'm going to focus on each movie's non-main character's speaking cast and how the extended characters in Superman actually feel like they exist when Superman is not on screen, while the ones in Fantastic Four don't. Let's illustrate that point with a very simple question. Who is this? What was her role in the movie? And most importantly, tell me one trait of her personality. All right, time's up. Her name is Lynn Nichols. She's the chief of staff for the Fantastic Four and the Future Foundation. And as for her character, she is the chief of staff of the Fantastic Four and the Future Foundation. That's pretty much it. But she is one of the highest profile named characters with speaking lines in this entire movie, and is one of the people the team interacts with the most often, outside of the main cast. If you remembered all of that, then congratulations, man. You pay a lot more attention and have a much better memory than the average viewer does. So a special no prize to you. Meanwhile, over in Superman, same question with a comparatively important character. Who is this? What is his role in the movie? And tell me one trait of his personality. You may or may not have remembered his name is Steve Lombard, but you likely did remember he's one of the columnists at the Daily Planet, who acts as a comic relief foil to Clark Kent and other Daily Planet staff. And for traits of his personality, boisterous, arrogant, obnoxious, jockish, blunt, and so on and so on. There's plenty to work with for this character, even though he has such a small amount of screen time. We learn quite a bit about him, even if a lot of it is through comic relief. And it lets us know that he exists as his own person with his own life outside of the Daily Planet and Superman-related events. Is he a particularly complex character? No. But he exists to flesh out the world of this movie, to give a face to the people living in Metropolis and working at the planet. He's there for the other characters to bounce off of and interact with, and for us to see how Clark Kent fits into the wider world as a mild-mannered reporter. In Fantastic Four, What's-Her-Name exists for one reason and one reason only: to make it seem like there even is a Future Foundation, since outside of her, it seems like the organization is only the main 4 members of the team occupying this gigantic building all alone. While the movie tells us it's a large philanthropic organization that does work all around the world, we see virtually nothing of that besides this one chief of staff Reed interacts with a couple times. This is not a character any more than the Baxter Building itself was. While meanwhile, the Daily Planet is absolutely filled with characters, and every one of them gets at least one moment where you get to learn enough about them to believe that they actually exist in this world, except Ron Troop. Let's compare 2 more somewhat similar characters with Ben Grimm's love interest, Rachel Rosman, and Jimmy Olsen's love interest, Eve Teschmacher. Besides superficial aspects of the character, like being a teacher, living around Yancey Street, and being Jewish, what do we actually know about Rachel in Fantastic Four? Her and Ben only really ever bonded over their shared sense of community. We really don't get that much about her personality or learn what would make her and Ben a good couple if they do officially get together. She's really only in the movie as a side character to Ben, to show his struggle to accept connection with other people due to his fears about his appearance, to show he is still connected to his roots, and most weirdly of all, to show that he's Jewish without having him explicitly be portrayed as Jewish for some likely topical reason I can't think of. You could have completely cut her out of the movie and we'd only lose a teeny bit of Ben's characterization. With Eve, though, she's not a complex character or anything, but we learn a lot about her not only through how she acts, but through both Luther and Jimmy's interactions with her. She's directly related to the plot, while also being her own character completely separate from it. We can get an idea of what her life was like before the movie with Jimmy, as well as an idea of how she became involved with Luther later on. We learn that on the surface she's the vapid, selfie-loving arm candy of Lex Luthor, but we see that she's actually quite scared about how Luthor will react if she leaves him. But how disturbed she's becoming at some of the things he's doing. We learn a bit about her past with Jimmy and her somewhat one-sided affection for him, all of which tells us quite a lot about this very small character in the movie. Again, she's not a particularly complex character, but she is a character. She exists as more than just a plot accessory to our main characters to make them look like there's actually a world beyond them. Even comparing the television host characters in each movie showcases what I'm talking about. And in Fantastic Four, we have Ted Gilbert, who hosts a talk show who starts the movie telling us all about how beloved the Fantastic Four is, and ends the movie telling us the same thing. He serves this role well, but outside of that, he's not much more. While in Superman, we have Clevis Thornwade, a host on the Sphere News channel. We don't learn that much about his actual character, but we do learn a lot about his news persona. He's initially very supportive of Lex Luthor and very quick to start pushing Lex's Superman is a threat narrative in your standard news propagandist way. And later in the movie, after Lex's crimes have been revealed, he immediately turns on Lex, calling him a traitor to humanity without actually ever taking any responsibility for pushing Lex's narrative to the public. We don't get all that much about either character, but one is definitely more fleshed out than the other. Then lastly, since we're running out of Fantastic Four supporting characters, while still having quite a few Superman ones, let's compare Harvey Elder to another incredibly minor Superman villain, Sidney Hepperson. Harvey's arc across the movie is he attacks the surface world in the past, for reasons that the movie never actually tells us. Then, in the past, off-screen, Sue had talked him out of it and worked with the government to make Subterranea an officially recognized city. And at the end of the movie, the Fantastic Four call in his aid to let people take refuge in Subterranea. Besides learning that Reed and him still don't get along, but he's happy to help Sue, we learn virtually nothing about this guy. I feel like there was initially probably more involving him in the movie, but if there was, it got cut out. And don't give me any of that, his motivations were explored in the comic prequel, because you shouldn't have to read some random unadvertised comic to understand a movie. I mean, I could understand Niobe's character perfectly without having had to have played Enter the Matrix. And even on Superman's side, this isn't a fair assessment, since Sidney Hepperson is an even smaller character than Harvey Elder was. You likely barely remember him in the movie, and yet he's still more fleshed out and has a little character arc we actually see on screen. We're not just told about it. We see that he's one of the technicians working for Lex Luthor, though he's perfectly willing and loyal to take orders as Lex becomes more unhinged and begins endangering Metropolis and maybe the entire planet in his mad vendetta against Superman. Sidney is one of the only characters who starts to speak out against Lex, but when Lex orders him to allow the portal that's tearing Metropolis apart to continue spreading, dooming everyone in the city, Sidney obeys while only passively condemning Lex's actions, knowing this is wrong but continuing to follow orders. And when Mr. Terrific arrives and starts taking charge of the situation, we see Sidney step up and say he knows the codes to stop the rift, but Mr. Terrific shoves him out of the way and tells him to shut the hell up, showing us that this little character's arc was a message that if you don't step in and do what's right when it matters, and only do so when the tides are turning, you ain't considered one of the good guys. What message does Mole Man's arc explore? Nothing really. He only exists to, 1, trick comic fans into thinking Fantastic Four villains are in this movie, and 2, to tell us that Sue is a good diplomat without ever actually having to write that into the script. And the same thing applies to the world at large. In Superman, when it's revealed that his parents had sent him for more nefarious reasons than had initially been presented, we see that many different people react in many different ways, with some people still believing in Superman, some people thinking that he is secretly been evil all along, and many people being unsure what to think. And even by the end of the movie, when he saved the city, different people have different opinions of him and other superheroes based on their own beliefs and agendas, as we see through how the government talks to each other while watching what's happened at the end. In Fantastic Four, the people of the world are basically a monolith. When it's revealed that Galactus wants Franklin Richards and the Fantastic Four refuse to give him up to save the world, we see an angry crowd of people outside the Baxter Building. But when Sue goes out and gives a speech about how they won't sacrifice the Earth for their son either, this one speech to this one crowd has more or less pacified the entire world, since we see the whole planet coming together to enact Reed's planet teleportation plan soon after. For the most part, the entire world is treated as just one character. All the side characters in Fantastic Four exist for pretty much no reason but to be glorified accessories to our main characters. You could cut them all out of the movie like they did Red Ghost, and very little would change. In Superman, the side characters are an important part of the movie's themes and world building. You cut any of them out, and you're going to be left with entire holes in the narrative. And you're going to lose much of what the movie's trying to say. Because in the world of Superman, everyone contributes to making the plot of this world. While in Fantastic Four, the world only exists as a playground for the Fantastic Four to jump around in. There's nothing wrong with that, but both movies set out to make a living, breathing new world for fans to become attached to and explore, so they'd want to see more out of them in the future. And the characters who actually populate each of the worlds are the difference between caring about that world or not. Because if the rift had destroyed the world in Superman, all these many people we see across the movie would have tragically died. That would have been quite a bummer. But if Galactus destroyed the world in Fantastic Four, sure, it's sad to see a world die and all, but as long as the main team make it off to another universe, what should I care? What did we actually lose? What's different than that one random planet that we saw get destroyed earlier? Anyone I care about is just fine. And honestly, I think there's one main reason so much focus was put on world building in Superman, while so little was put into Fantastic Four. And that's what each movie was building towards. Superman's long-term investment in attaching you to the new DCU versus Fantastic Four's short-term approach to trying to get you to see Doomsday. Why do each of these movies exist? Sure, they exist because passionate writers and directors poured their hearts and souls into creating works of art and yada yada yada. But that's not the initial reason that they were each created. The soulless corporate bureaucrats who greenlit each of these movies before any writers were even attached did so for one reason and one reason only: to turn registered trademarks that the corporations they work for own the rights to into cold hard cash, yo. And they each came up with their plans on how best to do that. With Superman, they decided it was by scrapping the garbage fire attempt of before and starting fresh with a new shared DC cinematic universe. With Fantastic Four, it was by using the Fantastic Four to create a stepping stone from the floundering MCU towards the monumental budget crossover end of the multiverse saga Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Superman's goal was to make Superman relevant and popular in a modern pop culture that seems to be leaving him behind. It introduces a fresh new take on the character with the intent goal of appealing to a modern audience by showing Superman grappling with issues that affect the culture of today, while representing the simple ideals of the comics he comes from. Whether it succeeds or not is up to you. But the goal is to make a character who will last for the next decade of DC movies. The goal of the world he lives in was to lay the groundwork for that next decade of DC movies, to also exist within this world. There's an incentive to make every single character introduced as interesting as possible so they can spin off into their own projects or show up in other characters' projects. If one of them becomes very popular, it could be incredibly valuable for DC. They want you to see a world where Batman, Wonder Woman, and others could feasibly exist and meet up with each other one day. So creating a vast world with a huge scope and history of superheroes was in their best lost interest. Fantastic Four's goal was to introduce a version of the Fantastic Four that would win back fans of the MCU and superhero movies who've lost interest in the types of characters and stories the MCU has become known for in the modern day. They want the team to create interest in fans of more traditional superheroes who aren't going to be moved to go see a movie starring Shang-Chi and Falcon America. The reasons they are introduced on a different Earth than the MCU is both to justify this being called a multiverse saga by having at least one other universe that matters, and to try to get people who are sick to death of the MCU to give the movie a try by distancing it from it. So there's really no incentive in creating a living, breathing world. The only incentive is in selling the main team and maybe Galactus, if he'll show up again. I think this is why they cut Red Ghost out of the movie. They wanted to keep the thing just under 2 hours, and so when they were looking for stuff to cut out, they thought, hey, what does actually building up this universe's villains matter? They ain't gonna show up in Doomsday, and so gutting them out, and likely a scene with Mad Thinker as well. In Superman, they focus most of their screen time on building the characters of Superman and Lex Luthor, since it's likely they will both be major focal points in this universe, representing the greatest hero and villain who everyone else will rally around. They take the time to focus on showing how big and weird the world is, so they'll be able to feasibly introduce any random DC character or element of lore they want in the future, without having to worry about if audiences will find it believable or not, the way the MCU always has to do. And they take the time to flesh out the side characters of Superman's lore because they likely have plans to use them in different capacities going forward as well. With it already being revealed that they do have plans to use Jimmy Olsen in an upcoming show due to the character being pretty well received. Fantastic Four exists for two reasons: to introduce the Fantastic Four into the MCU and to justify Dr. Doom being the main villain of the next Avengers movie. And with us seeing in the post-credit scene that Doom is using Franklin in some way, it seems likely that Franklin may have even been a focal point of the movie due to their future plans on how they wanted to use him in Avengers as well. Not that they decided that the best story to introduce the Fantastic Four was one centered around Franklin, and then figured out how to best use him and the team in the plot of the upcoming crossover. There's really not much incentive to invest much screen time to the world building. Who knows what the plans behind the scenes are? Will this world even exist after all the crazy multiverse crap we're likely to see in the next couple Avengers movies? Will this version of the Fantastic Four even exist anymore, or will everything be rebooted? Superman cast relatively young actors who will keep their looks for at least the next 10 years or so, for the most part. Fantastic Four, though? Our Reed Richards is already 50 years old. They might as well have just used the one from 2005 since he's only a year older. And our teen heartthrob Johnny Storm is already starting to show wrinkles. I have a hard time believing that this would be the cast of the movie if they're investing the next decade in them. And if they ain't, then they definitely ain't investing in their world all that much in the long run. No, they casted actors who were currently trending in a short-term gambit to get people to see this movie, so they'd be more likely to see Avengers, which they've already sunk enough money into that many sources are expecting it will be the most expensive film ever made. This is why I believe Superman's world is so much bigger and more fleshed out than Fantastic Four's, because even though it wasn't intended, every single little decision from the writing to the casting, editing, and the very soul of these movies were affected by each of their long-term plans for these worlds and characters. And according to the numbers, it seems like Fantastic Four made a mistake. They should have really seriously invested in creating an incredibly rich and interesting universe all its own, that audiences could easily imagine having multiple sequels based in, and even for the potential for characters beyond the Fantastic Four to take center stage in potential spin-offs. Even if they were just planning to blow this universe up in Doomsday, it would have made it all the more surprising and tragic if this world was actually built. And if you're still not convinced that Superman took its world building much more seriously than Fantastic Four did, I have one last teeny point that I think illustrate the different movies' approaches better than anything I've said so far. So maybe I shouldn't have said any of that and just made a 2-second video. But that's the in-universe advertisements. In Fantastic Four, in the pivotal scene where Shalabal announces the coming of Galactus, we see a huge ad for Canada Dry in the background. We see a billboard where Johnny Storm is advertising Coppertone. And we see Johnny Storm eating Lucky Charms, all brands that exist in our world and were all suspiciously featured in scenes in the trailers, I might add. But over in Superman, the majority of the billboards and ads we see are for brands like Big Belly Burger, Soda Cola, or Choco Cookies. All brands that do not exist in the real world, and are all lifted straight out of fictional brands used within DC Comics. They're being used in this movie for the same reasons that they were created in the comics, to give the feeling of the real world where ads are everywhere, without it having to actually be our boring-ass real world. They could have easily tossed a Mountain Dew ad in the background instead. I doubt most people would have even noticed or cared that much. I and most most others weren't bothered by the ads in Fantastic Four or anything. Superhero movies are pretty notorious for blatant product placement, but using these fake brands makes the world a bit more playful and fun instead of just mundane. Their goal was to create a DC universe, and so they grabbed up fake brands from DC to give that effect even more, even though they likely left potential money on the table to do so. That's something we've never seen out of a Marvel or DC superhero movie that's based on Earth, and it's a level of world building I personally quite appreciate. Though I can't glaze this aspect too hard, since there's that crypto scene where he's surrounded by milk-bone boxes, but at least we can say they didn't focus on the logos in there too explicitly. But here's the thing. This may be annoying to hear after listening to this goddamn manifesto of whining about hoity-toity themes and metaphors in random superhero movies, but actually, you're right, super pissed off guy who's still watching this video while viciously screaming at me. Who gives a crap about the superficial look of a movie? Not every damn story needs to be a treatise on human culture or the malaise of the modern man or some bitchy crap. Sometimes a cool retro-looking robot is awesome just because it goes bzz, death to all humans, bzz. I don't judge stories based on my preferences from other stories, but I do judge a story on how closely it achieves what it's trying to do. And I think both Superman and Fantastic Four were trying to build a new world that would endear itself to the audience and become popular. And when it comes to building that world, Fantastic Four fails on nearly every level. And I think that even if people don't realize it, it's one of the major reasons there's been positive word of mouth about Superman that's been keeping people going to see it for weeks and creating excitement about what movies and shows will be coming out next based in the DCU, while I ain't really seeing that many people talk about Fantastic Four after it's only been out for a couple weeks. Except to question if the MCU is straight up dead. And the only buzz I'm seeing for Doomsday is buzz that's obviously funded by Disney. But what do you think? Was Fantastic Four actually brilliant in its lack of world building and Superman was just an overstuffed mess? Some element or lack of in either movie you think I should have covered but didn't? There's a lot more in both categories than what I said here. Let me know below. I legit love reading your comments, whether I agree with them or not. But whether you agree or disagree with me, click the like, bell, and subscribe buttons below if you want to see more videos out of me. And if you haven't seen them yet, but would like to see how the characters in both Superman and Fantastic Four compared to their comic book source material, you can click that playlist thingy there and there'll be videos on both movies. And before you comment, I know Supergirl drank in Woman of Tomorrow, but that wasn't a big part of her character at all. It was for 2 seconds at the beginning of the comic. It's not enough to say her being a straight up hot mess in the movie is even a 1-to-1 adaptation of just that comic. However, I should have referenced all of that in the video, so I do apologize. Anywho, have a super fantastic day. God, I hope these contrived awkward attempts to replicate Barbenheimer friggin' Dyson